Welcome to the Deep Dive,
Emerald City Hockey's Seattle Kraken podcast.
RJ. On this episode of the Deep Dive, we have some incredible Kraken news to go over, including some historic first wins for the team, some big updates on some of their biggest stars, as well as pitching the big, exciting, long alluded to kind of trade deadline special that we're going to do next week on the Deep Dive, given that the Kraken aren't going to be playing this week. So we it seems like the appropriate time next week to start digging into the trade deadline and hearing from everybody. So, make sure you hang around, get the phone number so you can call us, give us all of your big trades. But before any of that Kraken stuff, RJ, got to start with one of the biggest stories in the NHL today. All right. And I am, of course, talking about Gary Bettman receiving the Sports Business Journal's Lifetime Achievement Award. Because according to NHL.com, that's the biggest story in the NHL today.
Yes, and 30 years of Gary Bettman, definitely worth taking a look back at and exploring there. And I mean, talk about a slow news day. I mean, I'm looking down the list, and you've got the Bobby Hull stuff, and that's there. But Giroux of Senators leads 3 stars of week. Oilers E-Bug Berlin gets motorcycle vest. That's what he's up against today.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Yes, Gary Bettman is going to be passing David Stern of the NBA as the longest tenured commissioner in one of the 4 major North American sports leagues, 30 years on February 1st. He's done a lot, RJ. When he came in from, he was under David Stern originally over with the NBA. And when he came over, the NBA and the NHL were tied in revenue, viewership, all that stuff. Kind of third place in the pecking order amongst North American sports, really not that far behind the NFL, if you can believe it, everybody, back in 1993. And since then, under Gary Bettman, we've watched as the NHL has become a distant fourth to everything else.
Yeah, it's been a journey, hasn't it, Dylan?
Yeah, we're the only league to have, multiple major work stoppages and all terrible media rights deals that don't get us on any channels that people have to watch national games. It's a lot. Definitely worthy of a Lifetime Achievement Award.
Hey, Dylan, tell me you don't feel some nostalgia for the Versus Network.
I do, I guess. Remember how dark everything was? Like they had 2 lights and that was it. They just didn't have lighting equipment. That's what I remember from the Versus Network, and then watching Crosby and Ovechkin go at it because that was all the league had post lockout. It's just that.
Pretty much.
He has done a lot, though, and the reason I bring this up on the Deep Dive and not maybe on a Red Glare is because, look, Gary Bettman is the guy that helped the NHL expand from 24 up to now 32 teams, which includes the Seattle Kraken. He did pave the way for that expansion. Done a better job than the NBA in that regards, everybody. So we got to give Gary Bettman that. But I bring it up because without him, the Seattle Kraken and the way they entered the league and all of that would not have happened. I mean, would it have happened under somebody else? Maybe, but that's the what if game. And we don't play that around here. We're playing that next week with the trade deadline special. I just brought it up because I just thought it was interesting when I pulled up the NHL's website and it was like, oh, this is front page big time stuff. I was like, all right, well, I guess, in the interest of news, we'll let everybody know. Gary Bettman, 30 years, longest ever active commissioner. Congrats.
Yep. No, to those who celebrate, congrats and enjoy this momentous day.
Yep. All right, on to Kraken news, RJ. This past week, huge events, okay? Some of the biggest events in the franchise's history for the Seattle Kraken. And I mean, the biggest one, bar none, definitely got to start with it. First ever win against the Columbus Blue Jackets, baby. Let's go!
You had me going there. I mean, it's good to get that out of the way. Didn't want to go winless against the Blue Jackets, but I think you may be burying the lead a little bit.
You're right. I am. And because it wasn't just our first ever franchise win against the Columbus Blue Jackets, it was also our first game against the Columbus Blue Jackets to end in regulation.
That's the real accomplishment, not going to overtime against the Blue Jackets in any scenario.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, we can wrap up the week's news. I think we pretty much covered it.
Just about, yeah. 1-0-2 against Columbus all time. That's the place you want to be. That's what winners are all about. Because you know what that means, RJ? That's 4 points right there. That's a lot of points in 3 games. You'd take that.
2/3 of possible
right?
points
It's the same as being 2-1
in this messed up league.
Thank you, Gary Bettman.
And we've come full circle.
We've come
Great
full
pod,
circle.
Dylan.
We could end the podcast 5.5 minutes. Let's go. Look at our efficiency. All right. So there was the Columbus game. The biggest thing about the Columbus game is just team finished on a high note going into their bye and the All-Star break, all that kind of stuff. Of course, the much larger story from this past week was getting that first ever franchise win against the Vancouver Canucks, team that we have played and lost to in regulation more than once, and to finally get that first win against a regional rival and to do it in emphatic sense, RJ, fashion, 6-1, just totally handing it to them. Get the Bruce there it is chance at CPA, making fun of Rick Tocchet, who he tried, RJ. He called that timeout after those 2 Kraken goals, and you know what? His team responded by allowing a bunch more Kraken goals.
Yep, exactly. He called the timeout. He was giving it to his team, and yeah, team responded that way. Tocchet responded after the game by calling them soft. You know, this nice little loop here that we've got going in Canucks land.
The circle of NHL life continues.
All is as it should be. But yeah, it was a great kind of banner win for the Kraken, first win over the Canucks. The crowd going with the Bruce there it is chance. I think Kraken fans leveled up that night. You know, with the topical chants. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that brings the best fan bases out there. When you see an opponent that's maybe going through a bit of a mess organizationally, and you just add to it. You know, not entirely sure, you know, whether it was a Canucks fan or a Kraken fan who started that chant, but man, Kraken fans got on board. And you know what? If any Canucks fans involved, it was a nice little moment of unity there.
Yes.
You know, in support of very likable Bruce Boudreau.
That's important for a fan base going through what they're doing, is for everybody to be on the same page about what their future entails. The thing that I liked about it is, you know, we've long said that you can't have a rivalry until both teams have won. We've also talked about the idea of, you know, maybe not until a playoff series, kind of something more hard fought and, you know, not separated by months at a time, these games in the regular season at times. But I do think that, you know, getting the win, yes, that was big for building the rivalry, but having a moment like that where you can tease, make fun of, enjoy, relish in what this other team and what their fan base is going through, like that is the stuff of rivalries, is when you can acknowledge the stuff that's going on kind of behind the scenes with a team. That's generally what it is. I'm not advocating for going after players with like a personal life issue or anything like that. But when you see a franchise handle their coaching situation the way they did, and everybody is piling on them about it, and rightfully so, to see the fan base do that, like that's the stuff of rivalries right there.
Yeah, definitely. And just I'm so proud of the Kraken fans. When I saw that happening, I was rushing to get my phone out just to, you know, take video of it. But I was smiling the whole way. That's kind of what I wanted out of that game, and I was so happy to get it.
Yes. The other kind of big story that I want to talk about from that game, because obviously it was a Kraken game. Got goals from multiple different players. We're gonna get to the big story, everybody. Don't worry. But before that one, got goals from multiple players on the Kraken. 2 from Oliver Bjorkstrand. I felt like he had a fantastic game. Like finally, kind of getting some payoff for the level of work that he's been putting in. Tolvanen gets another goal. Donato continued his hot streak. All that kind of stuff. And it's really, this is a story of the week, but I feel like this game in particular was the best example of it, was just the depth of scoring that the Kraken have. And now we have like the numbers to kind of like quantify it in a very strong way. RJ, there are 11 Seattle Kraken players with 9+ goals this season.
That's just incredible. The level of depth scoring that you get from teams. Somebody, it feels like somebody is always on. We'll talk about this. I mean, I guess we talked about the Columbus game a little bit, but you look at a guy like Morgan Geekie stepping up and
Mhm.
getting a big goal there. Like somebody always seems to step up with this team, and that was the case against the Canucks too. And they also showed kind of how they can just thoroughly beat a team. By basically possessing the puck the whole time, and you get four lines rolling, and it's so hard to defend against. The next morning, and this quote will kind of stick with me,
Mhm.
Hackstall was asked about how well his team defended, or are you proud of the way your team defended the other night against the Canucks? And he said, we really didn't defend that much. We didn't have to.
Didn't
We
have
had the
to.
puck the whole time.
Yeah.
And to hear that from a coach just kind of shows the level of domination there.
Yeah, and we've talked about the different kind of things that can show that, maybe some stats that lie sometimes, hits being one of them. Vancouver out hitting the Kraken 20-8. Well, again, you can kind of only hit somebody with the puck. So if one team's got the puck the entire time,
Well, actually, we'll
well,
get to
I
that
know
in a
we'll
bit.
get to that, but that doesn't count as a registered hit. So
Yeah.
as far as the stats are concerned, that's the way the system is. But yeah, when I see that number of 11 guys with 9 goals, the person in 12th, Tolvanen, with 8 in his 15 games played with the Seattle Kraken. I've talked about it before. One of those kind of big metrics people use, and certainly the gambling sites and all that stuff use when it comes to trying to predict playoff favorites, setting odds for stuff like that. They look to see which teams have the most like double digit goal scorers. Like, yes, 20 goals is like a special milestone that can show like how effective a player is, but 10 goals is again, if you get that number into double digits itself, like that's a lot of guys scoring for you. It's a lot of guys who on any given night can step up, and come playoff time, that's generally what you need as the games get a little tighter, a little more physical, a little greasier, and a little more low scoring normally. uh that's
Mhm.
that's the kind of stuff that matters for you. The other big thing was shout out to the Kraken PK. Canucks 0 for 5, never really even looked dangerous on the power play. I just think the Kraken penalty kill, this week in general, this month, has looked fantastic.
It has, and you see the difference in switching to their different system, where you've kind of, instead of that little wedge plus one, you've got the box. They're playing a little bit more conservatively, but it's amazing how well they've adjusted to an entirely new PK system, kind of on the fly. But
Mhm.
this is credit to the coaching staff for recognizing a change needed to be made, making that change, and they're seeing the results in season. And I think they have more wins, more points right now than they would have otherwise had they not changed it.
Yeah, I very much agree with that. Talked about it on the post game live. Whiteboard even made an appearance to talk about it. That was
Yes, gotta love that.
some big time stuff right there. The last thing before we get to the big Maddie story that I want to talk about when it comes to this game, RJ, was the fact that they won it coming off of multiple days of rest, which is, forget about the fact that it was against Vancouver. That's just like a new thing for the Kraken this year. As we all know, they've struggled when they've had multiple days off. It's one of the reasons we've speculated that they've been better on the road, is kind of a more consistent regular schedule. It's easier to get into that rhythm of playing, being off, playing, being off. For them to be able to do that also, because I think we were all scared. There was lots of comments in previous post games or on Discord, on Twitter, about being worried about what this team is going to look like, of like, oh gosh, we have to play Vancouver coming off the 3 days rest. But you know what, I really think that the Kraken are kind of figuring that situation out. I feel like they've just come together as a team, RJ, in a way that they all have like kind of a natural rhythm and chemistry with each other at this point. I don't know that they need a schedule to kind of dictate that for them anymore.
Right. And it's something that I think they had a big problem with last season. We look at their record coming off of breaks, especially, last season, and how poorly they did. And even kind of at the start of this season, but I think it's all kind of come together. They're able to recognize, I think, when they have these trouble spots. And we saw it later in the week, coming off a really just flat out bad effort against Calgary. And everybody admitted as much. And
Mm-hmm.
then the next day going in against Columbus, everyone knew what needed to be done, the changes that needed to be made, the effort that needed to be brought, and they did it. And
Yeah.
that's the sign of a team that has those standards in their mind, and they know, okay, this is what our standard is. We're going to play up to it. And I'm hoping that that continues after the All-Star break. And I'm as confident as I ever have been that will be the case. And especially going out on the road. I think a lot of times too, when they've had these breaks, and I went back and looked at this last night, coming off of those long breaks, the Kraken have a pretty bad record, in franchise history, but a lot of those, they were coming back at home. And I know we've talked about, for some reason they're better on the road. I don't know. I think it's going to be good for them going on the road straight after this All-Star break, maybe a little bit easier to focus.
Yeah, and I say 3 days off, technically back on the 22nd on that Sunday, they had the Super Skills Showcase, which we talked about last week. You gave us a great review on last week's episode of the Deep Dive talking about that, alongside some incredible photos from Jen. Like, those are some of my favorite ever Kraken photos, the stuff she was able to take, and we were able to include in that podcast, the video portion of that podcast over on YouTube. Because you can just tell what an amazing time those guys are having. And that was coming off of playing however, like a ridiculous amount of games, like 14 and 21 days or whatever it was, for them to show up the night after a shootout loss and to be that happy and that engaged with the fans. And you could just see the joy on their faces. It was really, really special. She did a great job capturing it. So want to give a shout out to Jen there. The last thing I'll talk about, and I'm not trying to like push off the Maddie discussion, everybody, just because that's going to be a longer, more detailed discussion as we talk about like the league's concussion protocols and everything. The last thing I want to bring up from this week of the Kraken playing, RJ, is, and we've talked about this the last couple weeks, Philip Grubauer actually passed Martin Jones in save percentage. And we were talking last week about it. He was close. It hadn't quite happened. But after this past week, Philip Grubauer, in kind of the one traditional stat that the goalie can control themselves, save percentage, and even that, some of that's dictated by the team in front of them, Philip Grubauer is outperforming Martin Jones now. We can officially say it.
Yes. And I mean, good for him. And, this is nothing against Martin Jones. Obviously, Jones, has done everything well that he's done this season.
Definitely.
But yeah, for Philip Grubauer to kind of keep inching his way up there, you really feel like, given the way he's played, he's gonna hit that 900 mark pretty soon, which is just something we haven't seen from a Kraken goalie ever. And it would be really nice to get that at some point.
It's like the Kraken goaltenders have been stuck playing in the 80s or something. Like, never in the 21st century, RJ, did I think that, we would just have teams that could go like multiple years with sub 900 goaltending, much less a team that could be sitting first place in their division with it.
Although I do think part of our mindset has to adjust a little bit. Back when we were, kind of growing up with the
Versus Network days.
In the Versus Network days, the average save percentage was something around 915 over the league, and now it's down as low as like 905 or something last I checked. So you do have to adjust a little bit. 900 is actually just a little bit below league average now instead of a lot below.
Yeah, that's where all these people about Connor Bedard could be the next guy to hit 70 goals in the NHL start coming in, because they're like, well, scoring's up. And it's like, it's not up that much. Cool your jets, everybody. 70 goals. Yeah, so that's the Philip Grubauer stuff. Just want to bring it up again, just because I don't know. I just feel this need to defend him against that section of the fan base that's been super critical of him. And I get it. Last year, justified. He'd probably say it was justified. He played really poorly last year, but this year he has not been playing poorly. It's just been circumstantial stuff that has led to his record being so much worse than Martin Jones. And so I'm just, any chance I have, I'm gonna stick up for him a little bit.
Yep. Now I have a question for you on Grubauer, because this kind of leads into, post All-Star break, because I think the good play from him has certainly come. We've gotten that. I don't think you can deny it anymore. Since the new year, his play's been really good, but what hasn't come are the starts and the high leverage starts too. I think if you look at the starts that Martin Jones is getting, the games that Hackstall's putting him into versus Grubauer, it's the pattern of a starter backup relationship. That's what it is. Martin Jones getting all the high leverage starts. I mean, getting, if there's a 50-50 or whatever, you could start either guy. It's almost always Martin Jones. That back-to-back against Calgary and Columbus, Jones gets the more important and the harder of the two games. Do you think we start to see a little shift there? Where it goes more into a split, or even Grubauer can take over that starting role? Because that just hasn't happened yet.
No, it hasn't, and you might know better just because you're around Dave Hackstall a little bit more.
Fair
But
point.
I would, but I probably would have done that a little while ago. I would have worked more towards 50-50, and then based on how they've played recently, I would have probably started to play Grubauer a little bit more. I think he's been playing fantastic. The Root broadcast, during that Columbus game just kept showing different on-screen graphics showing us how fantastic Gru has been really since he came back from injury in late November. He's been lights out in all the opportunities that he's been given. I would like to see him start multiple times a week. I said that on that last post game. I can guarantee you that barring an injury, he's going to start at least one game the first week the Kraken come back to play. But that's only because they have a back-to-back on the East Coast on the 9th and 10th. So I don't know. I think it would go a long way if Grubauer plays one of those games that first week, and then the second week when they play on the 12th, 14th, 16th, and 18th. If Grubauer is able to get half of those starts, maybe one of those
Yeah.
on the road. The first two games are on the road. Second two games at home. If him and Martin Jones can split those 50-50, one home and one road game apiece, I think that would be a lot as far as signaling that Hackstall is starting to shift his mindset there.
Agreed. And the only reason I hesitate on this is just because we've called for this for a little bit, maybe
Mm-hmm.
a week or two already, and we definitely haven't seen it. And Hackstall
Yep.
is kind of clearly kept with Jones as the starter, so it's the kind of thing where I'll believe it when I see it, but I think we might start to see it coming out of this All-Star break.
That's only because Hackstall, like we said it, like Hackstall probably it was all planned out with everybody, and then we said it, and he was like, "Well, I can't do it just because they said it." Then it looks like right they're coaching the team, and I'm not coaching the team. It was one of those kinds of situations. So really, that's on us. But
Yeah,
I think
that's how this works.
yeah, I think moving forward, the results are speaking for themselves, and that kind of closer split is going to have to happen. Enough putting it off, RJ. We got to talk about the Matty Beniers injury now. In that Vancouver game, taking that kind of blindside interference penalty hit. I mean, he didn't take the penalty. Myers took the penalty. But that interference hit from Tyler Myers where he goes head first down into the ice. His head pretty violently snaps back up after it hits the ice there. We now we're assuming again. I still don't think it's been confirmed that it's a concussion.
Nope, has not.
But
No
that's
details on that.
it's based on all the evidence from that night and what's happened since then, that's certainly what all the signs point towards. And it's unfortunate, RJ. I'm wearing my Maddie for Calder shirt right now. But he was having a fantastic season, and we kind of got to see in those next two games against Calgary and Columbus how much Matty Beniers in this first full season really means to the Kraken. And we can get to the concussion protocol stuff in just a second, but having him absent, I mean, it hurt their offense for sure, but I think it was even more stark in that Flames game, just how much defense he kind of provides and cover for some of his defensemen he might bring to this team.
Exactly. And that Flames game, told the whole story as far as how much the Kraken missed Matty Beniers there. What you had was a team that was completely unequipped, I think, to deal
Mm-hmm.
with his absence. And Dave Hackstall tried some things out line combination wise. Very little of it, I'd say almost none of it worked. It just the Gord line that he kept together, played well, but beyond that in the lineup, there just wasn't enough from the forwards, and I think you really felt his absence there. And yeah, just there's a lot that he brings to this team, and I think it's the kind of thing that unfortunately you take it for granted until it's
Yep.
not there. And I think we all kind of saw the effect of that. And in the Columbus game, it was better. I think having a worse opponent certainly helps, but you also have guys like Morgan Geekie stepping up big time to fill that void. But it's still not quite the same, and so the Kraken are going to miss Matty a lot for however long he's out. Hopefully that's not too long. I mean, we can talk about the injury itself and what that might mean as far as potential timeline, even though it's pretty murky. I mean, one potential good sign is that after the Columbus game last night, Dave Hackstall said that the All-Star break, of course, is well timed. We've got several players banged up, but the quote is, "We don't think there's anything that's too long term." So hopefully he's directing that at, Beniers, Schwartz, and Schultz, and the
Yeah.
injury situation there. And so hopefully that's a good sign for Maddie.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, what he brings as for me in the low slot, both offensively and defensively, the Kraken were kind of missing it. You saw Alexander Wenberg step up kind of big time in both of those games offensively, playing net front, picking up a goal in each game, kind of doing that and being in that spot. But defensively, the way Maddie just covers for a defenseman, allows a defenseman to chase a puck carrier behind the net, knowing Maddie's right there, and that kind of special ability he has to read passes and to always put himself in the defensive zone exactly where he should be to take away a key passing lane for the opposing team. And this is something going back years to my scouting reports from him before he was ever even drafted by the Kraken. I talked about I don't even think it's conscious for him. I just think wherever, like, he just sets up and he just naturally knows exactly where to be to take away a pass to the slot or a cross seam pass or whatever it is. He just knows exactly where to be to disrupt what the opposing team is doing without having to do anything himself, just by existing in that space. And that's the sign of a special defender. I look at the defense he's been playing, and I can't help but think, Selke votes are in his future. I look at the fact that he plays that hard defensively in two-way, and he's only got the 2 penalty minutes on the season, thinking Lady Byng votes are in his future. It's a lot of special stuff in his future. Unfortunately, if it is a concussion, we know that's stuff that, hopefully it's not too serious this time, but they add up, and we'll talk about that in a little bit with Joonas Donskoi. But it's one of those, it's the scariest injury that you can have in hockey because of all of the unknowns, because you're dealing with the brain. It's not something that's easily diagnosable. The symptoms can vary so wildly. It's not like if you tear a muscle, you strain a muscle, something like that, you break a bone, right? Like, the symptoms are the symptoms, and the course of treatment is the course of treatment. It's very cut and dry. And with concussions, it's not that case. It's not that way. There's only so much diagnostic testing that you can do for it to try to ascertain what's going on. That's another thing that adds to the mystery and frankly the scariness of it. And we've just, we've seen so many careers cut short, RJ, because of head injuries in this league and in other leagues. That you just can't help but kind of think that way. I'm not trying to be too pessimistic or anything. It's just it's naturally what pops up for me, just because of, like I said, the history we've seen. Whether it's a Mark Savard and Eric Lindros back in the day, Paul Correa. I mean, these were all fabulous players, fantastic players whose careers were on amazing trajectories and then forever altered afterwards because of concussions. And I would just hate to see that for Maddie.
Yeah, and it's not just the career too. It's the quality of life,
Yep.
for the rest of your life potentially. So it's something that you definitely have to take very seriously, and I think the league doesn't take seriously enough. So it's an unfortunate conversation to have, but one that needs to be had.
Exactly, and kind of following that, we talked about it that night. One of the things that was most difficult to watch about the scenario was it was clear after that hit, before we saw replays and saw how hard his head hit the ground, it was clear that Maddie wasn't himself. He was struggling to get off the ice. The door was open. He kind of glides over to the bench, and then he doesn't really make an effort to get through the open door. And this is after Geeky has hopped on the ice for him. Like, it was clear that he wasn't thinking properly, is the bottom line. And again, as scary as that is to say, that is what was happening. And then he goes to the bench. He finally gets on the bench. They blow the play dead. He goes onto the bench. He sits down. He does a classic thing we've seen guys do after head injuries, where they kind of sit down, they take a breath, and they get wheezy, or the lights are too much, or whatever it is, and they just kind of sink forward, heads in hand. He disappears kind of behind the bench. And one of the things that bothered me the most watching that wasn't that I was seeing him affected that way, because obviously that's horrible, was the fact that not a single member of the Kraken coaching or training staff was talking to him. Nobody was making an effort to go over and see if he was okay. He missed one shift, but then came back out and played the rest of that period before being pulled during the second intermission. I thought that was something that, again, I mean, this is Matty Beniers. The name of the game is hustle with this guy. Like, that is absolutely what he is known for. The moment he was struggling to get off the ice and he wasn't hopping off that bench, like if no matter how hurt he is, if it's not a concussion, Matty Beniers is finding a way to get off the ice as quickly as possible so his replacement can get out there and he can help his team however he can in that scenario. The moment that that wasn't happening should have been the clue to everybody in the Kraken organization that something was wrong, and we didn't really see the Kraken act on that, and that bothered me.
Yeah, it bothered me as well, and it was something I was even, thinking about when he didn't come out for the third period too. He was allowed to get back on the ice. I think it was 2 minutes and 37 seconds of game time later.
Yeah.
That's not enough time to properly evaluate something like that, and especially when we have the benefit of the replay. You see, there are the tablets on the bench. Anybody can look at that and see a replay and see his head bounce off the ice the way that it did. I was able to pull up that replay right away and get it out on Twitter, I think before Matt even played another shift. It's something that everyone had access to, and that he's able to come back and not just play one shift, not just play two shifts, play three shifts before the intermission. And thank goodness the intermission was as close as it was. Good thing there wasn't 15 minutes left in the period. It was at least kind of closer to the end of it. But to see that, and you have to ask that question, because I think it's something that's gotten lost in, a lot of people upset with Tyler Myers for the hit, should there be a suspension, all this conversation. But something that gets lost in that is asking the really important question, I think, of how is it possible that Matty Beniers was able to come back and play less than 3 minutes later, given that had happened and it was something kind of clearly identifiable that checks all the boxes for a potential concussion.
Right. And so we'll get to the Myers stuff in a second, but based on what you were just talking about, I pulled up the concussion evaluation and management protocol for the NHL for the season of 2022-2023. All right. And in here, it's long. I will not be reading all of it audiobook style, although maybe if you're interested in that, everybody, we can add that to one of the Patreon tiers. But in it covers a couple different sections. Number one is education, and that's clubs show an educational video about concussions. There's brochures, a concussion poster, visible signs video to show, club managers and everybody what the visible signs of a potential concussion are, so they can better do a better job of handling it. And then educational meetings, again, kind of whatever that is. So that's the education side of things, which is frankly all of this, as I read it out, RJ, this is all like the NHL kind of covering themselves from future lawsuits related to players later in life, because that is something that has already happened for them. But then as far as what the actual protocols are, is at the beginning of the season, players undergo a SCAT-5 testing via an app to kind of get a baseline for their neural abilities and stuff, and that way later on, if they're given that same test and they score lower, it incorporates motor skills, all sorts of stuff. If they score lower on it later, then that could be a sign that they're in some way impaired. They're given baseline impact testing, which is a different form of testing, same thing, a paper and pencil test, all that kind of stuff. So they're given these baseline tests at the beginning of the season, so that later on during the season, if they need to be administered those tests to determine if they have a concussion, they have baselines. That makes a lot of sense to me. I think that's fine. But then you get into the identification of possible concussion, RJ, and you get into who's responsible for this in the next section, in-game identification, roles and responsibilities. And this is where things get a little strange, because the NHL is making it very, very clear that it is up to the clubs to identify and handle these. The NHL is not going to be taking on any of that responsibility. Their responsibility is all that education and baseline testing and all of that stuff beforehand. Now it's on the clubs. And yes, they will work with clubs to have league spotters, quote unquote, who are there to observe. But even that is largely put on the clubs to have those people there and to be communicating with them.
Right. And there's a lot of talk about the league spotters and, has the spotter pulled them and all of this. But if you read through it, it's clear that the spotter's, kind of official role is to assist the club. And it's ultimately the club responsibility.
Right. It is up to the club. So any whether it's we're talking about this Maddie situation or even the even worse one from just a couple of weeks ago was Jean-Gabriel Pageau, where he is so disoriented he cannot get up and skate. He has to be assisted off the ice, and then 3 minutes and 20 seconds, I think, in game time later, he's back out on the ice. Again, this is not enough time to go through and to evaluate a player. And when you read what the spotters are looking for, what check marks they are looking for, so many of them are checked in both of those instances, whether it's Pageau or Maddie. And it's just it's mind-boggling going through this that nothing was done for either of those players.
Yeah, absolutely. And you look at the visible, they have visible signs, mandatory evaluation. If any of the following visible signs occurs after a direct blow to the head or blow to the body, and you look at the signs that are there, you have the blank or vacant look, motor incoordination or balance problems. But this is, it's labeled as number D, letter D, that gets me too, because this is slow to get up, except as noted in section 3, blah, blah. Player is slow to get up following any of the below mechanisms of injury. A blow to the player's head, from another player's shoulder. But here, number 2, the player's head makes contact with the ice. Slow to get up, check. Player's head makes contact with the ice, check. Right there, mandatory evaluation.
Right, and I would argue with Maddie, blank or vacant look, because that's what he has on the bench. And I guarantee, I would bet money that if you talk to him, he probably doesn't remember those 3 shifts afterwards either, because we've heard that from so many players too that have come back and played after concussions. They just don't remember it, or NFL players, all that kind of stuff. It's so rough. And so look, I'm not trying to put all the blame on the Kraken, and the bottom line is they did eventually, someone stood up and said, okay, something's not right here, because he did not play the third period. That is huge. Like that is massive that they did do that. I still think that things should have happened faster than that. I don't think he should have been playing in that game period afterwards, but I do want to give credit where credit is due. They did pull him and keep him from playing anymore after that intermission, where maybe then they administered the tests and everything and were able to conclude that he shouldn't be coming back. I think it's one of those things, and again, we'll get to Tyler Myers in just a second. It's one of those things that it has to be called out. Every team that does it, whenever it happens, I don't care if it's your team, your arch rival, it has to be called out, because it is so important that we protect these players and protect their heads, especially because of how important it is, not just now in their ability to play in the NHL, but as you said, the rest of their lives is what we're talking about here. This goes beyond sport. It goes beyond what's on the ice. This is where you get into, are you a human being with empathy, right? Like that's kind of the level we have to start hitting when it comes to some of this. And so whenever a situation arises like this, and a team doesn't seem to be taking it either super seriously or acting quick enough, I believe it's important to talk about it and kind of call them out.
Absolutely. And it's tough on this one, because you've got, they did eventually take him out, and you've got that timeline, but and I've tried to do some digging as far as, how that actual process works kind of on the minute to minute basis. And the people who really know, I feel like, can't talk a whole lot about it. And so unfortunately I didn't, kind of get as clear of an answer as I was hoping for. But it's the kind of thing that, even if there is some difficulty with the timeline of it, this is something that we need to be talking about and trying to work on better solutions for, because, you'd hate to see it, but what if Maddie had taken another hit in one of those 3 shifts, and then it gets a whole lot worse? Right. You have to work on trying to get a better process, even if, it feels like there's limits as far as what you can do timing wise. Should always be working on how to improve the process and make it better. So that's a conversation that just needs to continue to be had.
Right. And so let's talk about one of the things that can also be done to work on this and try to make it better from the league standpoint. And this is where we can talk about Tyler Myers, because I think both you and I had, we were in post game, right? And people are talking about, is that going to be a fine, a suspension? He should be suspended, all that stuff. And there's no question that it was interference, that it was a dirty play, and that he caused this to happen needlessly. Like there's no way around that. Nobody can argue against it. But you and I both knew nothing's going to happen here. Like, there is not
Mhm.
going to be a suspension. Like, I thought maybe there'd be a fine, but probably not. He was assessed the interference penalty, and that's just what the league will handle it. And this is where I get frustrated with the league, because, again, if you want to take this stuff seriously, you have to, what many people would consider unfair punishment, but you have to punish instances like this. If people feel like they can get away with removing arguably the Seattle Kraken's best player in Matty Beniers, and all it's going to cost you is a 2-minute minor for interference, right? Like, at some point you have to treat it that way. Do I think Tyler Myers was trying to remove Matty Beniers and give him a concussion, all that kind of stuff? No, I'm not saying that. But the league needs to think of it that way. They think about it that way for everything else, right? You always have to think of the worst case scenario when it comes to that stuff, so that you can adequately dole out punishment to be used as what the word, I'm spacing on the word, a deterrent. Yes,
Deterrent, yeah.
because that's what it needs to be. And I've talked about this, whether it was the Tom Wilson thing on our Terry Panarin or whoever it is, but you have to take them seriously in those instances, because the bottom line is people are there to see the best players, and they're there to see them play healthy and to play hockey, and that is how you make money as a league. And if you let stuff like this happen, you jeopardize all of that. The whole like financial pyramid structure of the NHL becomes jeopardized, and it's astonishing to me that after the lawsuits the league has gone through, how out of the way they go to legally clear themselves of everything else, that they then don't go and kind of punish moments like this to try to create that set of rules that's going to tell players like, okay, you're just never going to get away with this, so just get it, stop doing it, period. Like, get it out of your system.
Yeah, and it's odd to me because that reasoning, as far as looking at the after effect of a situation, the after effect of a hit, it's always or very, very commonly used the opposite way, where the league will look at a hit and say, okay, this was a potentially reckless hit. There's some real potential danger here, but thankfully no injury was suffered, and therefore we don't have to dole out any discipline. And I see that all the time, as far as kind of explaining away a lack of discipline, because no injury happened on a potentially dangerous hit. I don't think there was a whole lot to this Myers hit. It was interference 100%. I think more often than not, the player doesn't, the player who's the recipient of the hit doesn't happen to have his head hit the ice in that way. It was kind of an unfortunate way, that Maddie fell into the ice. But you never see that justified the other way. That, like,
Right.
look, it's interference here. It's a penalty. It's not like the Ovechkin hit on Pajot in that earlier situation, where it's a completely clean hit. It's part of the game. Yeah. It's something you see all the time. This is different. It's interference. It's a penalty. And that you kind of, I guess, have to be responsible for the results of your actions, even if something unfortunate, beyond what ordinarily would, results from you basically breaking the rules and interfering with a player here. That you should have to deal with the consequences of that, and you take that responsibility upon yourself when you do that. It's kind of like, the high sticking thing. Even if you didn't mean to high stick a guy, you have to be in control of your stick at all times, and whatever results, you're going to get penalized for.
I was going to say, so many of the rules in the rule book are just that, of you are responsible for your body and your stick and your actions at all time, whether you mean to do something, whether you high stick somebody because you're falling down and you kind of flail your arm out to try to catch yourself and your stick hits somebody. It's high sticking. You get called for that. Like, that's just the way it goes. And for it to not kind of work this way, I agree with you, is it's strange, to say the very least, disappointing, to use a stronger word. As we talk about this and we talk about the severity of it, can't help but think of also Donskoi, who did an interview with a Finnish outlet, I believe, in which he kind of discussed his ongoing situation. We've again kind of known, it's kind of been like an open secret type thing, right? That it was a concussion and he's been out and he's obviously on IR. But in that interview, he talked about this being his 7th concussion, and having kind of serious conversations with, his family about what his future may entail because of that. And it's one of those, again, it's an uncomfortable situation to talk about, and it's not necessarily what everyone wants to hear. As you're excited and you want to go to Kraken games and you want to watch hockey and be super involved in all that, is that there is this aspect of it, because it is a contact sport, that these are the realities of that. And one of those realities is that a player like Donskoi can have 7 concussions, who he can be experiencing symptoms now, 4 or 5 months after the fact,
Yep.
and still have those symptoms. And the bottom line is his career, it's very much in question, if not leading towards doubtful at this point, that he will ever play again.
Yeah, and that's kind of where he's at, and also, it's someone who's now starting to consider things maybe, beyond his career and what his life is. Via, again, this is a Finnish outlet. The article was in Finnish. The best I have is Google Translate here, but he said there've been severe headaches and dizziness, and that's something that's still occurring. And that's got to be scary when you haven't been playing hockey. You're just going about your ordinary life, and you're dealing with stuff like that. And Donskoi mentioned that it really makes you think. And you mentioned, again, it's kind of a rough translation, but like, I have a family. I need to be a functional father for many more decades. And you have to think about that whenever you're making a decision about your future. And unfortunately, he's at this point where you can't undo any of this stuff. He's already on his 7th concussion, and this is something that could potentially impact him the rest of his life. And I think, it's kind of timely that this comes out, right as with the Matty Beniers situation being so present too. This is the effect if concussions are allowed to kind of build up and you keep playing and you keep sustaining more of them, it can have really, really serious effects. To the point where you miss a whole season of hockey, and you just have to start worrying about, okay, what's the quality of life going to be for the rest of your life?
Right. And one of the things that you also think about when it comes to these athletes, and I'll kind of get into some of the questions I saw people having after this article came out, this interview came out. Donskoi is only 30 years old. Like, it seems like he's old. He's been around forever. He started with the Sharks in 2015, right? Like, that's a long time ago now. This is, we're talking 8 years ago. But he's only 30. like you're talking about a 30-year-old talking about potentially dealing with stuff for the rest of their lives, and you just you see him with his kid at that skills showcase out on the ice, right? And you see the smile he has and everything, and that he's thinking about those moments and the ability to have more of those moments, and like you said, all of the moments through that child's life. And it's one of those, I think we forget how young athletes are, because we will classify them as old at different times, right? You've always joked about the aging curve and all that kind of stuff, but it's 30. Like, that is not an old human being as far as human beings are concerned, right? Athletes being old, or running backs being washed up when they're 28. I'm 28. Like, it's not that old, okay? I'm still learning. I'm still making mistakes. I'm still trying to figure out life very much, right? The idea of kind of you being washed up and used up by that point, it's unique to athletics. There is nothing else that is going to say that about people of this age. And so, again, it's one of those where you almost you hate the fact that these people at those ages are put in this position where they have to try to think about the consequences of actions now that might not pop up for, so many years later, that it would be, their life doubled plus some. You know what I mean? Like, that's one of the realities of it. One of the things that I was fielding kind of questions for, and a lot of people had, was if he doesn't play. And again, we're not saying that he isn't or anything, but if a player is in the same position as Donskoi and is unable to further their kind of playing career, what like options are available to them as far as the league, teams, all that kind of stuff, taking care of them. And I will say, as far as teams taking care of players when they're injured or potentially, suffering from some sort of long-term disability, teams can step up and handle that stuff if they want to. That's always kind of like a case-by-case basis. So going down that road is it's a what if scenario kind of thing. So I won't go down that far. I'll only focus on like kind of what's in the CBA and what's on the books as far as the league is concerned, based on what I was able to what I knew already and what I was kind of able to look up. Number one thing is you're injured like this, especially because it comes from playing hockey while you're under contract. Your contract is going to continue to be paid to you. That is a guarantee. Donskoi is going to collect the three, however much in actual salary his deal is. His cap hit's 3.9, so somewhere in the vicinity of that. Looks like his base salary this year was 3.9. He will collect that $3.9 million, even though he was unable to play this season or most of the season, whatever it ends up being. So he still gets that money. That's good, because again, you're talking about a 30-year-old who then their career, their livelihood gets ended, right? 30, it's a young age to be retiring. It just is.
Yes.
So you have to think about those things. You get the $3.9 million. Taxes, I think, though, are applicable to that. So something to be considered. When it comes to other stuff, as far as like a disability claim, filing a long-term disability claim with the NHL, the CBA is a mess of just legal jargon, all this stuff. So one of the things I did was I went to a wealth management group that focuses on NHL players, and I went through their information that they give NHL players and how they break it down, because the bottom line is their job in this scenario is exactly that, is to take all the legal jargon and dummy it down so that, hey, this is what it really means. This is what's going on. So I went to this wealth management group, and when it comes to the disability claims, long-term disability claims in the NHL, if you are out and experiencing basically symptoms or unable to play for 12 consecutive months, and you are determined to be unable to play hockey ever again as determined by a league appointed doctor, you get awarded, RJ, $1 million, a one-time payment of $1 million. Yes, exactly. Dr. Evil, $1 million. Now, it's a tax-free $1 million, which is good, because it is $1 million. Like, I'm not trying to make light of the idea of $1 million. However, when you're talking about somebody being long-term disabled, that could mean concussion. That could mean something significantly greater, right? That could be, a player's neck is broken and they're a quadriplegic or something. Like, it could mean something very, very severe. And for it to kind of, in a way, like, again, I know $1 million is a lot of money. We'd all love to get $1 million. But for it to be $1 million that you could be talking about somebody in their 20s or their early 30s receiving, and that having to offset, kind of some medical costs or long-term treatment costs or any of that stuff, it's not great. Like that, health costs.
Well, I say anyone
fast.
who's dealt with any kind of relatively intensive medical costs know how expensive that can get. And it's the kind of thing that can really add up, especially, if you're an athlete's age and you've got the rest of your life to think about.
Right. So that is what the disability thing, and that's, again, you got to jump through kind of hoops to get that. You have to be injured for 12 consecutive months. Again, and then a league appointed doctor. Again, you could read into that if you want or not, is the person making that determination. So that's how the NHL handles it. That's what's in the current collective bargaining agreement. As far as the other thing that could potentially help out players in this situation, is the idea of what is there, which is the pension. And so just, again, I'll just let everybody know kind of what the pension thing is, because if you're an NHL fan, you might be interested in this. The pension plan, there's a ton of factors that go into it, as far as how many games you actually play at the NHL level, what qualifies as credited service time. There's a lot that goes into it. I won't go into all of it. Feel free to look it up for yourself if you want to. I will say that some of the kind of bullet point bigger things that I have from it is that under the current collective bargaining agreement, when you first play your first full season, so if you play 82 games as a skater, your pension for that later on, and I'll get to when you can start collecting that, is about $22,000. So that'll, playing a full 82 game season will result in $22,000, and then every year you're able to kind of do that bumps up by $500.
Do you need to hit the 82 game mark?
That's the number for 82 games. It
Oh,
scales
okay,
based on
gotcha.
how many games you're playing. But if you play a full season in the
Okay,
NHL,
gotcha.
that is $22,000 under the current collective bargaining agreement. That then you will be getting in your as part of your pension payout annually later on in life. Or you can take it as a one lump sum payment. I'll get to that in a second. So that's kind of what it is, and then it all scales from there. They have, like, in the CBA and the Wealth Management Group pulled it out, this kind of like example of a player career. It's an interesting table to look at. Maybe I'll add it to the YouTube version of this. I can throw up the table, but it's so that's kind of how much money we're talking about on this. But one of the things that is about it is you're not allowed to collect this money until you're 62. Now, you can start at 45, but it will be greatly reduced because this is going to be paid out for the rest of your life. So starting it at
Right.
45 versus 62, they lower the amount kind of significantly to make up for that fact of you're getting it nearly 20 years early. But like in the case of someone like a Donskoi, who, let's say, has to retire because of stuff now at the age of 30, this is where I was talking about. You're talking about something where it's his entire lifetime plus two. He have to go and live his entire life all over again, and then 2 more years to get to the point where he can start collecting his pension, which the pension maxes out at $255,000 per year. Again, a lot of money. Most people are
Yeah.
never going to make that much money in a year, much less to have that as just your pension payment. But when you're talking about players taking the amount of abuse and punishment that they're taking, and in these situations specifically, the long-term side effects of that and any sort of long-term care that they're going to need and whatnot, that money can they have to, one, get there, and then
Mhm.
after that money can kind of quickly go if you need any sort of care. Certainly later on in life, as players like get into their 80s or anything, if anybody's ever needed with a parent to whether it's a nursing home or at home care, like that stuff costs money. It just does, and
Yep.
you can burn through that stuff fast. So some of that is about the Donskoi situation. Some of that's just to inform hockey fans, like, this is just how it works, what's in the CBA. You can take the figures for what they are. I'm just kind of trying to report them there. I'm not trying to say that, like, oh, poor players or anything like that. But I do think that it's important to remember the full context around them, given we're talking about athletes who, they're the average NHL player retires or leaves the league at 28 years old, and they only accrue about 5 years worth of service time. So those are realities to think about when we do talk about them as human beings.
Right. And I think it is worth talking about again too, as far as, the numbers. And we're not saying, oh, these poor players. You look at Joonas Donskoi, and according to Cap Friendly, he's made about $20 million over the course of his career. You should be able to do okay on that. But I want to really quickly look at, another 30-year-old, same age in the Kraken organization, Max McCormick, who just recently got called up. And you look at his estimated career earnings, about 2.5 million, and
And
that does not account for taxes,
I was just gonna
doesn't
say,
account for
yeah.
agent fees, doesn't account for all his expenses. He's probably actually taking home about half of that at most, and you're looking at maybe 1.25 million or so. And there, he doesn't have any more NHL time left guaranteed. This is not something, he just got called up, but you can't guarantee that. And let's say he sustains something that's going to be a real medical problem for him going forward in his life. That money really does go quickly. And and requiring medical care for all that time, and not having probably built up a huge
He's
pension amount too, because he hasn't played a ton of
only
NHL
played
games.
yeah, he's only played 93. So again, you're looking at around $22,000 once he hits 62 years of age.
Yeah. And then how do you, if you're having big medical bills pile up, how do you sustain yourself even from the age of 30 to 62? How do you
Mhm.
get to that point, especially if it's the kind of thing where you can't go get an ordinary job? You're not in a position, if you say you have concussion symptoms where you can work in a normal environment. It does become really dicey. And I think it's worth thinking about for players like that, because there's a lot more of those players than there are, Joonas Donskois or above, who are, kind of top six forwards in the NHL for a significant amount of time. And so, you got to think about that as well. And then one more thing, if I can just kind of get into, not totally rant mode again, but just one thing I want to talk about is, the NHLPA and the
Mm-hmm.
players union. I think this is the kind of stuff, whether it's the pension or, the injury payment or all of this stuff that they fought really hard for. And I think it's good that they have. I mean, that's what a union's there for, is to make sure that the players are protected. I'd like to see them fight a little harder to prevent this stuff from happening in the first place.
Yes.
Because you see those really hard tooth and nail fights and labor negotiations and all of that. And I think that's fantastic that they've won the kind of stuff for the players after the fact, after an injury, all of that. But I would like to see more of a fight beforehand to prevent it from happening. And that part of that's being okay with longer suspensions for things like this.
Right.
Part of that is really working with not just, with the league, but also the teams to create a better process to get a player who sustained a head injury off the ice and out of the game, sooner than what we saw with Matty Beniers or JG Pajot. And I just don't see enough fight in that area. And ultimately the union has to do it. That's what a union's there for, is protecting the players. As anyone with the union probably, knows and understands, the league isn't going to be taking the lead on that as far as protecting players. It's got to be the union that does it. And so that's kind of my last, what I want to close on anyway, is just a kind of a call to action there for the union to help prevent these things. So you don't have to be in a position where you need that medical payout or that pension.
Yeah, it is one of those, and this is where hockey, kind of being in the situation that they're in, it has been used, in some ways, it doesn't benefit the players a lot when it comes to these CBA negotiations. There's a reason why, as we talked about at the beginning, right? The NHL is the one with all the lockout issues and everything. It's because when you're dealing with a smaller overall pie, sometimes then it gets more difficult to deal with things. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is the stuff that the PA can be taking a lead on and really focusing on. And I get that they've had to focus on maybe larger things in the past. But now this is what you can start on, and you don't have to wait until it's time to renegotiate a CBA. Because you can be working on this stuff and formulating your arguments and being vocal about it and basically telling the owners, like, hey, this is what's coming, and we're going to build up years worth of talking to fans and getting them on board and gaining their support and gaining the support of all of our players to be on board with this and to be willing to do whatever it's going to take to make it happen, right? Like, that's part of it too, is really a lot of this has just been a failure of leadership. And that's part of what leadership is in a situation like this, is it doesn't start when negotiations start, because deadlines are fast approaching. It can start years in advance. You can start controlling the narrative. And I would like to see the leagues, they're the PA, trying to control this narrative here, because the bottom line is, the league makes a lot of money. That was one of the things in that Gary Bettman Lifetime Achievement Award, is they made $5.2 billion last year. Okay, the league, these owners, the teams, they don't make that without players, right? Like, that's the trade-off. That's how it works. And so it's gotta, they gotta give a little bit too. And I wish the PA kind of was a little stronger with that messaging sometimes when it comes to the health and safety and long-term future of their members. So there you go. There's a nice kind of full circle. Before we officially end this podcast, though, got to talk about next week. I alluded to it earlier, talked about it earlier. Want to start with the trade deadline stuff. Not going to be Kraken stuff to talk about next week on the deep dive because of their bye week, because of the All-Star game. Yes, we'll talk about the All-Star game and, whichever member of the Kraken ends up going to that and all of that stuff. But one of the things that, people keep asking us, whether it's on Twitter, Discord, in the post-game lives, in person, what are the Kraken going to do at the trade deadline? What do you think about this? What about that? Next week, this is where I want to do kind of a Shark Tank style pitch show, a special podcast special where RJ's going to read off our phone number in a little bit. We used it to great effect, I felt like, over the off season, people calling in and giving us their favorite moments from the Kraken's inaugural season. I'd love to do that again this next off season. But we're going to give out the phone number. We want you to tell us who you think the Kraken should be targeting at the trade deadline time, and even give us the scenario. What's going to go back the other way to get this player, or give us, even just pitch us a couple names of, hey, I think the Kraken really need this. What do you think about X, Y, or Z of those players? What do you think it would take to get them? Whatever it is, this is your time for all of your trade deadline questions to be asked. You can call them up, leave us a message. We will play the messages and then discuss them on the next episode of the deep dive. And then we'll also kind of throw in some of our thoughts about what the Kraken should do as we kind of approach that. At that point, it'll be less than a month to the trade deadline.
Right.
So it should be a good time. So I'll pass it over to you, RJ. You can read everybody out the number for them to call.
Right. And I am so looking forward to this fun conversation with all of you about trade deadline speculation. I mean, give us all your potential offers, all this stuff. And I'm especially looking forward to using this phone line again. It was so fun in the off season when we got to use this. So call us, make your case. Shark Tank style, present your potential trades and let us know why it'd be a good idea for the Kraken. So here's the phone number if everyone's ready. All right. 425-243-7053. I'll say that one more time. 425-243-7053. So give us a call, leave us a voicemail, and we will play your voicemail and talk about your trade proposal. And I'm so looking forward to going through those next week.
Yeah, and if if for some reason you don't want us to play your voice message, but you want us to talk about it, just let us know. We can do that too.
Yes.
No obligation there. I just thought it was a lot of fun to do that and to hear from people and kind of get that. It's just like with the Release the Fan podcast. It does mean a little bit more when you hear the actual person talking about it and their energy and passion. One last thing too, I guess kind of try to keep it a little short and on topic. I've just realized we should maybe throw that out there, or know that if you go longer, that's great. Give us the in-depth argument, but know then maybe just for timing reasons next week I'll have to edit down what we play on the podcast. So you can make it longer. Just know you might not get the full message read out on air. But I am just gonna throw that out there.
Yes, important caveat there.
Yeah.
Brevity is important, and podcast can't be 5 hours. So, you can give us the whole breakdown and everything.
Give it to us. We're willing to listen. Definitely, we're excited for it. But just know that that's the trade-off of that. All right. Thank you everybody for listening and for joining us on this episode of the Deep Dive. I guess we'll see you next time for that fabulous trade. It's so funny. I keep calling it a trade deadline special. It's still like 3.5 weeks before the trade deadline, but I got to think of a better name for it when we actually do it next week.
Shark Tank trade deadline edition. I don't know if we can use that, but that's basically what it's going to be.
Kraken Tank.
Kraken Tank. All right, we'll think about it. No. Kraken Tank was last season.
Yes.
All right.
Got a Shane right. Everything's good.
We'll come up with something good. We've got a week to do it. Enjoy your All-Star week, everyone.
Yep, absolutely. We will see you all next time. RJ, they tried to do it to us. They tried to keep the deep dive curse alive by putting out massive Kraken news moments after we finished. But joke's on them. I hadn't even finished editing yet. So, brief little addendum to the podcast. Yes. Everybody, we just found out that Matty Beniers will be replaced at the All-Star game by Chandler Stevenson of the Vegas Golden Knights. Yeah, that's the cue to boo everybody. So what this means is, to the best of our knowledge right now, and maybe the deep dive curse will come back to get us in just 25 minutes time, RJ, I guess the Kraken will just not have somebody at the All-Star game and just be the only team to not have somebody at the All-Star game.
That's certainly what it looks like at this point. And that's an unfortunate situation there. I mean, given that Seattle is one of the powerhouse hockey markets in the NHL, as has been kind of confirmed by their getting the Winter Classic next season, to not have a representative at the All-Star game is unfortunate. Yeah, my guess as to why this has happened is they probably had maybe 3 to 4 alternate players that could have gone in Matty Beniers' stead, and I'm guessing they all had prior plans, something arranged where they couldn't easily get to the All-Star game, and the league, of course, not wanting to kind of derange people's lives. And I understand, that instinct. I don't want to cancel anybody's vacation plans to make them go out there. But yeah, they just decided to go with a golden night of all
No,
people.
that's the thing that hurts the most. But just there's so many optics. Like you said, we know Seattle, where they stand as far as being one of the top teams in the NHL as far as revenue goes. This is a team that is sitting in first place in their division, RJ. Just not going to have a representative at the All-Star game. Like, that's wild to me, too. I was going to say I hope, but I don't have any faith that it'll happen, that there will be something to acknowledge that during the broadcasts and festivities. There will be reminders that the Kraken exist, because otherwise, RJ, this is just going to look like an all-star event from like 3 years ago. Nothing else has changed.
Who wants that? Who wants to go back to the terrible time in the league where the Kraken didn't exist? So hopefully there will be some Kraken recognition there. I know the Kraken on their tweet about this mentioned, hey, you can still see Bowie at the festivities. And look, I like Bowie, but Bowie is not a replacement for a player. I saw Bowie on the ice during the media skills showcase. He's not a replacement for a player, let me tell you.
I was just going to say the only way that works is if they treat Bowie as though Bowie is one of the players and Bowie participates in the skills showcase doing whatever a player would do. That's the only
fair.
That's the only way you can play this that works. Bottom line, that's it. Okay, League, Gary, we've talked about you a lot in this podcast. You've been listening, I'm sure. That you can make it all right. Everything that I said earlier, you can make it all right if you do that one thing. That's the only way to fix this.
Ball's in your court, Gary.
What you gonna do? All right, now for the actual end of the podcast. See you next time, everybody. Hey everyone, before we go, we just wanted to give a quick shout out to all of our awesome patrons over at patreon.com/Emerald City Hockey, especially our Terror of the Deep patrons. Absurdly Sane, Alex, Andrew, Austin H, Austin W, Beef, Burnt Creme, Chris, Coop, Daryl, DJ, DJ Singletone, Duthin, Eli, Gaby, Gary, Harry Legionary, Jay, Joni, Joshua, Kepler,
Kitty B. Kraken, Kyle, Leanne, Maya, Michelle, Nunya, Paige, Paul, Rebecca, Sarah, Scott, Sean, Shoeshine, Striatic, Tasty Kobold, Team YMIAT, Tank Commander Ty, Tyler, and Wendy. Thank you so much for making all this possible. We really appreciate your support.